All right. Hi, y'all. We are recording. I am very excited to be here today with Omar Ceballos. He is a student working in customer service who is in the Dominican Republic. And I met him through our wonderful mutual friend, his cousin, Lisbeth, who lives here in Newcastle. So thank you, Lisbeth, for that connection. And thank you for being here today and chatting with me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin to jump into other questions, Omar, tell me briefly about where you're from, what you're studying, and what you're currently doing.
Well, I now born and raised in the Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic. I'm currently a tourism and hospitality student. I'm also studying culinary arts. And I'm currently working directly customer service and, referrals and all that logistics with insurance companies in the United States that work directly with the private sector in the state of Florida. And yeah, my plans is just I dream of working directly, especially in the culinary arts and customer service and hospitality and tourism business area in the industry.
Okay, cool. And you have worked in America, or you have lived in America for some parts of your life as well? Is that right?
Yes, I did. I live in the West Coast in the state of Oregon.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah,
interesting choice.
I know. Yeah. West Coast. I lived in Central Oregon, specifically the town of Bend. Just a small town of 100,000 people, a mountain city. It was a very interesting experience. It was the place that inspired me to get more involved in hospitality because it's a very touristy, outdoorsy town. And I was able to work with ski and snowboarding tourism directly. And it got me very interested in sustainability and different ways of doing tourism and outdoors tourism and leadership and all that. Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. I didn't realize that. And obviously, snow and cold weather is very different from what you're experiencing now. I think I have a few different Australian viewers, and I tend to find that Australians are not as familiar with Central America and that part of the world. So maybe I know just from like Wikipedia is that Dominican Republic and Haiti share a land border. They're an island in the Caribbean. It's about 10 million people in Dominican Republic. Is there anything, tell us just quickly, if someone had never heard of Dominican Republic before, if they speak Spanish as well, is there anything, tell me, sorry, I should not be explaining this. Tell me a little bit more.
Well, what can I say? We are basically literally the first colonial city in the continent. Santo Domingo is the oldest colonial city directly under the Spanish crown, Spanish colonizers. And I think the history of the island as it currently is, not only just the island, but the Caribbean, as we were talking behind scenes, is just a very good image or a snapshot of the colonial history of the American continent, because you see the first country that got its independence from a slave rebellion, that is Haiti. Then you have our country that for a longest time and a very complicated history with Spanish colonization and then French colonization, very close to coming to American annexation, and all these political situations have transpired through generations. And you see an island with a cultural and political divide, which honestly, as a person that wishes that things were different, I think it's one of the things that we have to tackle, coming closer together as a community, both countries. And especially now in a time where it has become very evident that countries need more unity and more integration and more cooperation,
Sure. Wow. I did not know any of that. So that's fascinating. And when you're talking about unity, are you kind of talking about the relationship between Haiti and Dominican Republic specifically? Is that kind of, or more?
I think that it's mostly, sometimes you can get the perception that because of good economic relationships, there's not like misunderstandings between the peoples, you will call it. And I think that we are in a very pivoting time in which people wishes that there was more of a clear understanding of the desires and the future of both countries, and that both countries could work together towards that direction. And at the same time, just like every country in which has a very important border,
Yeah.
you always will see manifestations of, right-wing populism and the type of politics that exercise of the people, and that points that, the direction of marginalized groups. And I think that we're currently in that, that space that you can see manifesting globally, this right-wing populism that makes the political messaging and propaganda to be a message of divide, of a divide, of a cultural divide in politics based on fear.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think the average Dominican and the average Haitian has a very deep understanding of just how important it is to have an actual sense of cooperation and community. I work in a call center that is just basically outsourced work, and there's a good amount of my coworkers who are Dominican Haitian residents that live here, and they work here because there's a lot of demand for French Creole speaking work here. That maybe the infrastructure and the technology and what is needed for that type of work is not available in Haiti, but the private sector has caught up on the fact that it's work that is very attractive and is very remunerated, and you see usually a lot of that type of work being present here.
Yeah, and so that's interesting because I have so I guess my vague knowledge would be probably Dominican Republic is doing better than Haiti in terms of like I hear a lot about like natural disasters really affected. It's like I remember hearing about, was it the earthquake in Haiti a few years ago?
Yes,
and you guys are connected. You guys are the same island, the same landmass.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get too much into it though, because I do want to talk about how it's relevant. But you know a lot about it. It's really interesting. Well, you lived there, of course you would.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I always say that like in the public imagination in terms of like politics, usually talk about the border between Mexico and the United States as a border that we look at as an example of how policy specifically transpires and what it means to the people and to the political relationships of those two countries. But I always said, like, probably even more important is the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic, because you see the situation of a country that is rapidly growing economically, like the Dominican Republic, and you see the country that historically has been probably the most disenfranchised and poorer country in the continent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you will always see almost immediate results in terms of policy, in terms of border control, in terms of how people interpret immigration from the bigger picture in a macro sense,
Yeah, and I think talking about borders, everything, the coronavirus has really opened our eyes into how we're all connected, we're all fragile, we're only as good as like the worst person off, and and I think that's really interesting. But then I also, I think we're going to be like thinking about this more and how we're going to deal with every, even if we can try to protect our own country, but we are still affected. If when China shut down, all of a sudden we couldn't get, things from them that people needed. We're all in this together. I want to talk about how how Dominican Republic has been affected by the virus, and also about how you're connected to Florida because you work with Florida. You learn. You said you've been outsourced to Florida. A Florida company has you working for their call center. Is that right?
Yes.
And so I want to talk about all these things. And then I also saw that Haiti is ranked 87th for virus cases, and the Dominican Republic is ranked 39th. And I
Right.
wondered, is that accurate, or do they have poor medical
You know,
system? Yeah.
yeah, I think that in terms of us and how we look at the data, we're always going to be in that place of, since we don't have the same infrastructure as, let's say, a developed country,
Mm-hmm.
that delay of the understanding of the data, what it actually means, usually takes a little bit more time.
Right.
Um, but I do think that it's accurate in the sense that, of course, I would expect us to have more infection and deal with it in a bigger scale, especially since we are such a service economy, especially
Mm.
tourism. And it's a bit of an ironic type of situation in which, like, since our economy depends so much in tourism, and the closure of tourism because of COVID created sort of like an economic closure, like
Yeah.
complete economic closure, uh, just for the fact that the ports of entry were closed and that agglomeration of people in the resorts was not allowed. It gave us a lot of leverage in terms of dealing with the virus,
Uh-huh.
because we understood that, okay, well, there's nothing that we can do in terms of like what we depend from economically, meaning tourism and international currencies entering through to the economy through those services. But at the same time, it created that sort of like horseshoe effect where everything just met in the same middle, where
Mm.
now we are in a place in which we have to figure out how we can create a structure that allows that reopening of the economy, understanding that our economy is a quote unquote international economy in terms of like the people who participate in it.
So
And
is it almost like it's like you guys are talking about how you can keep going and reopen and create almost like a new economy
right,
that isn't relying on, because I read that tourism is huge in Dominican
right,
Republic.
right.
It's your number one, it would be your number one like industry.
Right. It's kind of like a catch-22 situation where you understand that teams, when you look at superficial data, maybe were made easier by the fact that such an economy dependent on tourism allowed its closure, given that it was an international situation that required that. But at the
Mm.
same time, you have to come to the understanding and the type of like policy decision of you understanding, like, okay, the moment that we decide to reopen, we are not dealing with a localized type of situation. The moment that you start receiving tourism from Europe, from the United
Yeah.
States, and all that, you have to realize that it's an infrastructure issue, and it's also uh, the type of like things that do not allow you the data to be centralized and accurate sometimes.
Right.
Um,
Right. So it's like it's about thinking about it in a bigger way than numbers, and numbers
right,
and statistics, because that's not always. Well, I mean, we're
right, right,
dealing with that in Australia. Like the even we're having new outbreaks. We thought we had it under control, and now we're like freaking out. And part of it is there's a delay in information, so you can't
right,
make the
right.
best decision.
That's
Um,
exactly right. And I
yeah,
think that it allows us to see just how sectionized these type of economies truly are, because you think tourism, but when you talk about tourism, you're talking about food, you're talking about uh, beverages and
yeah,
alcohol, you're talking about the accommodations in a air conditioned room, and you're talking about
yeah,
entertainment and transportation in buses and taxis and all that infrastructure. You have to sort of rewire your understanding when you understand that sort of like the base level of a functioning economy in your country, like a tropical island like we are, depends on all that functioning properly. And at the same time, understanding that the risks of the workforce are going to be exponentially and incrementally getting worse and worse as you reopen. So you know, it's the type of situation that makes you really okay. Things were comfortable, but now we have to reevaluate just how much we really want to be in that type of comfort without a plan and without a contingency that allows people to feel comfortable with putting their lives on the line. You know,
Yeah.
when we talk about this type of labor and people actually feel the pressure of having to go out there every day, that's exactly what they're thinking about. They're thinking about maybe there's no plan B or C, you know?
Yeah, and this is so interesting because I think, you know, even though it was not very well executed when the pandemic hit, a lot of people in the United States received stimulus money. A lot of people, and Australia has a JobKeeper program. Australia has a lot of different things to fund its citizens. I interviewed a doctor in Colombia and asked her about that, if anybody received money. And I think one of the problems is that there isn't the same type of government security, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
yes.
so tell me a little bit about that. Just and tell me what the Dominican Republic was like when did the virus hit and how did things change? How did they stay the same? Kind of tell me about how it was. Big picture, small picture, any of that stuff.
Yeah. I think that it's very interesting with us because the entire context of the virus starting and, you know, hearing it speak and how we sort of understood the curve and what it needed to be done to flatten it, all that happened in the middle of a political process of a general election. So a lot of the,
right.
yeah. So we had elections like 3 weeks ago. And you know, a lot of the fear of the people in terms of like aid and in terms of like that thing that we talk about, like that type of scientific and precise, accurate information that they needed in order to take action and make decisions, was they immediately got the understanding of how politicized it was and how the central government may have been using it to, you know, to just simply gain political points and just sort of skew the election in their favor. So that just at a level in terms of like the basic population trust in the government was already had that factor looming over it in terms of like, okay, we're in the middle of an election year, and how much of this is sustainable, how much of this is part of a government program that will continue, and how much of it is part of, like I said, it's part of an actual sustainable plan that allowed people to make serious decisions about going out there or actually choosing self-quarantining. So yeah, go ahead.
So they held the elections despite the fact that it was so like, did people mail in their ballots or was it very much people like lined up?
No, people lined up and went voting to the voting booth. We don't have, we simply do not have the type of infrastructure that allows mail-in voting.
Right.
And at the same time, you know, when you think about how, you know, like the space that people were in terms of economically and more precisely economically, was just a place of like anxiety and you know, wanting to express their vote as a repudiation of how the government dealt with the pandemic and how things were transpiring the past couple of years in the government. So people definitely just went out there and voted, you know.
Right.
It was one of the actually highest turnouts I've seen in the general election. And it's a very interesting thing to see, like, your country being the first election to happen in the continent in the middle of a global pandemic. But at the same time, like, it's one of the things that people just sort of expected it for it to be. That's exactly what it was. Like the election allowed people to sort of express themselves, and it was sort of like a catalyzer of like the rejection of the way that people dealt with the coronavirus. And that was
So,
very interesting.
so it almost sounds like the coronavirus and the whole pandemic is almost second in people's minds compared to, like, it's almost like people are more frustrated about maybe the lack of, like, the tourism industry is dead, and you don't necessarily have protections and facts, and what is it can people get the so two, like, these are very basic questions, and you have an excellent you have very big ideas, Omar, which is great. I love it. But I was wondering, do people wear masks at all? Like, and did they require, so everyone wearing masks when you go out all the time and everything?
Oh yeah. We have a mask mandate. We have the curfew. Right now it's from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. We do have, there's no operations in terms of food service or alcoholic beverages and things like that, like the suspension of beverages and people being closed indoors.
So they have enforced certain things. So there's no
yes.
Right.
Yes, there has been enforcement. I think the issue with our government was not the enforcement itself, but it was a communication that failed. It was the lack of a communication that failed apolitical and apartisan.
Right.
So I think that that was very important in terms of how people felt like they reached a point of breakdown.
Yeah.
And how people sort of rejected some of the messaging in terms of like medical professionals. They felt like they were receiving a partisan message.
Is it similar? Go ahead. At the same time.
And I think that at the same time, when you look at the way that some of our politicians deal with it in terms of like, okay, now that we're done with elections, now it's time to deal with the virus, I think that is part of that. That is part of that level of disconnection in terms of the messaging and what needed to be done.
Is it similar? So that's interesting. So there doesn't seem to be the same type of political divide over masks that there is in the United States, for example.
No. I think there isn't because basically our current the incumbent government lost in a landslide. So it's kind of like an unity in terms of repudiation to the government and understanding that it's kind of like it sounds like a little bit of a libertarian idea of people understanding that they needed to take a course of action and protect their health. Once it became very evident that on a state level, there was not the infrastructure or the type of true contingency plan to tackle the pandemic in an efficient way.
It's really, so it's just so interesting because it's like in maybe wealthier nations like the United States, they probably have the resources to tackle it, but there still is, people like it's just so interesting how basic common health care information can become politicized, and then the whole country doesn't trust anyone. Right. And then it's like, it's terrible. It's like
I totally agree with you.
I
totally agree with you. And and now that you bring that up, I think that also it shows you the reach of the corporate interest in our countries, because when you look at the Dominican healthcare system, you're basically looking at a mirror image of the American healthcare system. You're looking at a healthcare system that is very interested in the extraction of profit from the private sector, from the government. The very state of corporate welfare that you have in the United States, you see it manifested in Latin America, and especially in countries like ours that are trying to integrate themselves into the global economy. they want to simulate the American economy as much as they can because they want to participate as much as they can in it. You see what I mean?
Right.
And so you will see that in maybe in a smaller scale, but at the same time, when you have a system that is so similar economically and in terms of that corporate status quo, politically you will see the same results also, because it's the same type of partisan attachment to that corporate status quo. You know what I mean?
What is the healthcare like? Is the healthcare similar? Is it similar to the United States model in
Yes,
Dominican Republic? Yeah.
yes.
Really?
It's kind of
So
like we have sort of like pretty similar. The government offers that sort of Medicaid, Medicare structure, but everybody does not, let's say, qualify. It's basically under the decision of providing itself through the private sector.
Right.
But at the same time, it's a private sector, like I said, that wants to basically stay in that status quo and wants to basically sort of interconnect itself with the same corporate interests that we have in America.
Right.
And all of that is very connected to the type of trade agreements that we have.
Right.
It's just very, it's sort of like it's very telling to see the similarities.
So you feel like almost like Dominican Republic is trying to imitate, and maybe perhaps this is similar in a lot of countries in Latin America. They're trying to copy the U.S. model. I mean, that is a huge sweeping generalization, so maybe not. But your observations in Dominican Republic is they're trying to do what the U.S. is doing, but it is not necessarily helping the economy.
No. And also like and also I think we do it, but we don't have that same Americans have a very exceptionalist perspective about how they work with this type of thing,
Yeah,
a
lot of pride.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You ask any average conservative, and you ask them why is healthcare so expensive in America, and they will tell you, well, because it's the best. You know what I mean? But here we have an understanding of we have a very deep understanding of just how big our government truly is, and how historically that reality is, how it's not like a new development in our political history. So we usually see this type of neoliberal corporatism as something that happens. That's something that has been happening for a very long time, but now we are dealing with the consequences directly. Right. Meaning that my parents' generation, they come from a generation where healthcare as a right was not even part of their lexicon. It was not even part of their the things that they asked the government as something that needed to work and something that they considered as a right. But even then, people saw that the healthcare system didn't work. So I think that in countries like us that are so influenced by that type of imperial imposition from the economic power of a country like the United States, when it's presented to them as an alternative, as something that is functional, as something that comes from the top, that sort of like illusion of like, well, maybe if the developed country is doing it, then maybe that's what we need to do. You find yourself in a situation where people don't realize that they being sort of, it's kind of like when you get to your home and you realize you've been driving from the supermarket with a flat tire. You realize that the flat is the tire is flat, but you don't have a recollection of when it got punctured or whatever.
Or the frog in the hot water that doesn't realize
Right,
it's
right,
getting boiled, sort of,
right,
right?
right.
So wow,
Right. That's the type of reality that people deal with. And I think the coronavirus was that moment of like, oh wow, like this is how this works.
so you
this
think
is
that
this is
like
yeah.
people are like the veil has been lifted and people are starting to realize.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And like I said,
mm-hmm.
yeah, like I said, that was a huge part of how this government just
Sure.
completely got embarrassed in the ballot box. Like people
Right.
just kind of like, wait a second, I thought we were good.
Yeah,
You know what I
that's
mean? Like,
so interesting.
right?
And that leads me to another question I had. Were there protests in that? Like, there's been protests in many parts of the world. Were there protests in the Dominican Republic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was
Yeah.
it? What were they about? Yeah.
Well, we have a very very intense bout of protesting back in March.
Mm-hmm.
No, actually February.
Oh, really?
Back in February, because we had our our elections are sort of like we have the elections in the same year, but we make the voting for our local government in February and then our national government in May. So what happened in February was that the elections had to be called off and suspended because there was a situation with the implementation of electronic ballots, and all of the system didn't work. It got hacked, and it was just part of the political turmoil that we've been dealing for the past couple of years. And it was literally like 2 weeks of protesting right in front of like our electoral governmental offices, and that immediately receded the moment that people realized that we were dealing with the virus. But my estimation is that if it hadn't been because of the virus, we would be looking at a situation of people protesting all the way through the spring until the elections.
Right. So
right.
people
And
did.
also,
So like, my friend. It's interesting because I just kind of observed how in the United States there were kind of some people were critical of certain protests, and then George Floyd got killed, and then all of a sudden everyone was protesting, even though there was a pandemic going on. But then the doctor I spoke with in Colombia, I mean, obviously different countries have different reactions, and like not everybody is watching America all the time, but Australia did have protests as a reaction. So nobody was talking about, for example, like Black Lives Matter or anything like that.
Yeah, we were. Well, I think that it's because our political movement, when you think about as a justice movement, anything that you would think falls center to the left, we have it's very interesting because lately I've been seeing more of that sort of like internationalist alliance in terms of the American movement. And I think it's obviously the result of the connections that we are now able to do through the internet, where we adapt some of the language adapted to our reality. But I think that it goes back to what we were talking about, our social understanding of where we stand as two countries, two nations that also have a very, very, very bad racial history between them. And
what do you mean by that?
I mean, like we lived through a process of like dictatorship that was basically white supremacist, and it was always with creating that a type of animosity towards our neighborhood country, and that white supremacy actually engaged in the type of like persecution to people of Black descent in the island. That I usually tell people, when you look at the colonial and white supremacist history of a Caribbean country like the Dominican Republic, and you try to make a comparison to America, you come to the realization that they're pretty similar.
Oh, really?
They're pretty mirror each other.
Okay.
You see differences, maybe, the cotton trade in America. Here was the sugarcane trade, but it's same slave trade routes, the same type of agreements, the same type of rebellions. And now when you look at the justice movements in like Black Lives Matter, when you look at Justice Democrats, and you look at all of these sections of a movement that wants to create type of sustainable political change in America,
Mm-hmm.
you will see the similar type of direct political action here too.
Okay.
Like a really good example of that is that some of the candidates that got seats in our Senate, they are for very small progressive parties.
Interesting.
Actually, one of the candidates that won a seat was the most voted congressman in the election, and he's a progressive small party that probably has 3 seats in the Senate. And I think that you will see more of that. I honestly think you will see more of that, and you will see that type of solidarity and that type of integration, because the communication is present. The communication is present. The type of like camaraderie is there.
That is so interesting. So it wasn't so much about necessarily protest, but it's about ideas and new ideas that have kind of translated. That makes me feel really excited. Like that's really
100%.
really really cool. What was the name? Do you know what the name of that leader is that got voted in?
Yes, Jose Horacio.
Okay.
I actually want to mail you his online presence so you can see kind of
I would love to.
Yeah. But at the same time, like the major party that actually won big time in the Senate, some of the candidates that were able to actually push a proposal and actually present themselves as a viable option, they did it through just pulling a little bit back. We know that we live in a very conservative Catholic country. But I think that generationally we are making different demands. We're just making different demands, and we understand that when we live in a country that probably does not have the same type of like political apparatus that America has, in which the media and the parties and organizing and grassroots movements are so advanced in terms of resources and all that. We understand that it's going to be a slower process. It's going to be incremental, not in the same way. We're probably not going to. We're not going to see like a Bernie Sanders type of candidate anytime soon. But we will probably come close. I think we will come close. And this election was I was very, very happy and satisfied with the way that people at least went out there in the middle of all this crisis and expressed themselves. Like I've never seen such a big turnout in my lifetime.
I had no idea when I was writing you these questions. I saw some stuff, I was looking up some stuff, but I didn't see anything at all about this. Like, this is why it's so cool to talk to people from different places, because I didn't even know that was going on in Dominican Republic at all. So that's huge. Like, that's a big thing. I don't want to take a huge amount of your time, Omar. We've already talked more than I told you that we would. But I really wanted to, but I do want to ask you a few more questions. Do you have time for just, but because I was really curious also, this is a little bit different, because you work for a company in Florida, and you said you made some observations about the private sector in kind of what you do. I just wanted you to tell me a little bit more about things that you have observed during the pandemic. And tell me a little bit, just to give everybody an idea, in case, just to remind us what you do exactly and what you've observed.
Right. Well, I basically do everything that pertains of direct customer service in terms of like making people understand why they're seeing a certain doctor, what type of referrals they need, communicating to them very clearly what a prescription means in terms of like the relationship they have with the doctor and all things like that. And I think that, the private sector creates this type of relationship.
Okay.
And I think it's very telling that it's outsourced labor like I am, because it allows them to, maybe not put the medical professional in the position of having to, let's say, quote unquote, deal with this type of, workload.
Right.
That's the way I see it. I think that the healthcare industry in the United States has truly figured out a way to make things as efficient as it's possibly allowed and as cheap as possibly allowed. And
Wow.
and I think that I mostly deal with the Latino community in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it goes back to what we were talking about. Like, people have this understanding of healthcare, and they usually do not. And this is something that is entirely generational. I think that this is something that our parents and our parents' have to deal with on a daily basis in this new, very capitalist approach to healthcare. They usually cannot marry the idea of healthcare is something that I need immediately, and healthcare is something that I'm a customer of. You know what I mean? There's this huge sort of like bandwidth that a lot of people, like the work that I do, have to come in and create a level of communication of like, letting them understand, okay, I know that you need this, but bureaucracy and capital interest does not allow this to happen as soon as you might think it will happen. Things like that.
So are those conversations you find yourself kind of having sometimes?
Yeah, that's basically my everyday work. Just letting people understand why a referral was not approved, or why a prescription that they have, maybe maybe they are not qualified for a refill. And
wow.
I think that we have reached the point. I truly believe that we have reached the point where people are going to truly make very transformative political decisions in terms of how they feel, if they truly feel protected, if they truly want to be in a place where the quality of their lives, if we're truly going to live in a developed society in which our healthcare and our health itself and our happiness that depends so much in it is commoditized, then people are going to ask to wonder, like, who is actually protecting those interests in behalf of me, and behalf of my family, and behalf of the people I love. And I think that the United States of America is in that place, has been in that place for a very long time. I think it's pretty obvious that the average American understands that healthcare should be affordable at the very least.
Yeah.
I honestly think it should be free.
Yeah. Me too. I've seen it work in Australia. Like it can happen. It can.
Yeah. But like I said, it's very, the moment that you work with this type of, the moment you sort of like submerge yourself in the type of language, in the type of procedure that has to take place in order for people to get the most basic medical care, you realize that it's usually when people hit that wall, that sometimes inevitable wall of either bankruptcy or realizing that they don't have real options.
Right.
It's very disheartening. It's a very eye-opening situation when you are dealing with the people who have to face this
and
reality.
It sounds like you were on the front line. Like you were the one, like it sounds like you're telling people no, we can't. Sometimes you're telling people we cannot get you your medicine or your supplies. And you said you're dealing, so are you speaking in Spanish a lot?
Spanish and English.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
both. Yeah.
Because another interesting fact is that, like in the United States, one of the most frustrating things is that it's people of color and like the Latino community that are more disproportionately affected by
Right.
this pandemic, and so I
Yeah.
guess you would probably be
Not only the
seeing that.
pandemic, I think there's something very interesting that happens also, is that when you look at you look at the continental reality, and you look at the the population change and the migration trends. you it's very easy to forget that if I'm Dominican, right? If my dad is a 50-year-old Dominican that migrated to the States at age 35,
Uh-huh.
he's going to migrate to the States, and he's going to take with him the type of sanitary reality that was here in the Dominican Republic. So he's
Mm-hmm.
going to migrate to the States, and and the results
Uh-huh.
of the type of nutritional sanitary reality that he had in a way more poorer country is going to translate at some point while he's
Uh-huh.
in the middle of the American system.
Uh-huh.
So when you're dealing with like the aging population of Latinos in America, and you see diabetes and you see how they're impacted by COVID and all that,
Mm-hmm.
you have to look at how all that is so
Yeah.
also ingrained in the familiar history and the immigration
Yeah.
history of these families.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
like when it comes to that type of justice, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a matter of social justice.
Mm-hmm.
You have to truly um, the type of coalition that will represent these people politically has to engage in a community exercise that understands these things, that
Yeah.
understands that you're dealing with realities that go
Mm-hmm.
way beyond
Mm-hmm.
healthcare itself,
Yeah.
although it
Yeah.
is healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
It's like it's so interesting because I've heard like a lot of things happen, like everything that's happening, some people have just been like globalization is bad, and we should like there's a like this move for populism, is that the word, I guess, like this idea of like
yeah,
I disagree. I still believe in multiculturalism, but I do think
right.
it requires knowledge and people from different communities that understand what their culture is like,
Right.
and that is unfortunately, I think in a lot of places that that gets that people don't realize the importance of that, I guess,
Yeah,
and that's a big
and
part of it.
I think that people have people I think I always encourage people to, especially my friends in America, to encourage people. I encourage them to sort of reclaim concepts of representation.
Uh-huh.
Like sometimes we think about representation and we only think of it, if we think of it from an activist perspective. It should come from a place of actual political representation. Like people who are going to be out there representing political interest.
Yeah.
I think a really good example of that is that my cousins in New York, they all voted for Alessandro Ocasio-Cortez. Like they got really excited about those political ideas. But the moment I talked to them, I realized that they probably, as Latinos, probably don't agree completely from
Mm.
a socio-political perspective. But when I inquired to them and I asked them, and you come to the realization, they just want someone representing them because they need
Mm.
affordable healthcare.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they we usually struggle with the concept of a single issue voter, but
Yeah.
it happens a lot. It happens.
Yeah.
People understand that they need someone representing something that is affecting them directly
Right.
economically
So you
and
don't
socially.
think it was less about the fact that she was Latina and more about the fact that she just is for healthcare, or it was both, or yeah.
I think it was definitely both, but I
Yeah.
think that the voter
Yeah.
was educated and was and educated enough to reclaim the need for a very the type of representation that will give them
Mm-hmm.
an effective voice
Yes.
and
Yes.
effective results.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and yes, if I feel like that effective voice is similar to me because she's Latina, of course,
Yeah.
I'm going to, and she riles me up, and I feel
Yeah.
excited
Yeah.
politically because
Yeah.
she's gonna be defending me, of
Yeah.
course. But at the same time, it really tells you that okay, maybe I don't agree, maybe I don't fully understand like the Green New Deal. What I what I do understand is
Mm-hmm.
that insulin is almost $500 a month in this
Yeah.
household, and I
Yeah.
have to, and this is just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And if I see a political agenda that tackles that issue,
Yeah.
and at the same time is someone that represents me culturally, like of course I'm going to vote
Yeah.
for them. Of
Yeah.
course I'm going to be excited to have them representing me. And you know, I think that that is a very good sign.
Mm-hmm.
That is a very good sign. Like always, when it comes to that type of political figure, I always say, well, let's see what happens. Let's see
Mm-hmm.
now that they're there, now they're at the Capitol Hill. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm always going to celebrate the fact that people see a new voice and they feel represented by that voice, and they elected them, and
Yeah.
they are there.
Yeah.
I think that's always a good sign, and I think it's always good to ask for more of that politically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm,
I
mhm.
agree. I agree. And I also like her because she's young and she's a woman. And I know that that's not
100%.
necessarily like, I know that does not like some people will say you should never use that but
Right,
I understand that concept. It should just be about their values. But when his people voted for Bill Clinton because they thought he was cool, like you know what I
right,
mean?
right.
Like we always, if it's not cultural, there are things that make you feel comfortable about people.
And you
And
know,
yeah,
and the truth of the matter is that, of course, we want to live in a reality in which you won't even have to bring up the fact that she's a woman, but you
yeah,
have to because her opposition is the Republican Party.
yeah.
So you do
Who
have,
have
so
yeah, exactly.
you do have to completely and openly ask for that type of representation. Although, of course, like if you consider yourself from liberal to the left, of course, ideally you will wish like, okay, AOC is there just presenting her ideas. That would
Yeah,
be excellent, but this is not the reality that we have, and we
yeah,
have to be completely honest with that in terms of like how uh, you know uh, right wingers have sort of co-opted the idea of identity politics and have weaponized it in a way that you are supposed to feel guilty of the fact
mm,
that you want someone that looks like you representing you.
yeah,
I
yeah.
completely, I disagree 100% with that. I do
Mm-hmm.
want someone representing me that looks like me and that represents my voice, my identity, my
Mm-hmm.
needs, the
Mm-hmm.
interests of my community.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
until we are on the other side of that curve, until we are on the side of that curve when none of those things are needed, because we
yeah,
are in a place where um, our representation is directly through policy,
yeah,
we need to fight for that. We need to
yeah.
fight to keep pushing in that direction, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. I think it's a fascinating debate and discussion over that, and it's really interesting. And I can see some people's like I can see how the right has done it, but also I just don't think it's a huge deal. Like I don't think it's I don't know. I think it's just like it's just something. It's just a small trait that you observe that might help how you feel. And I like to see diversity. I like to see
Right,
different
right.
faces and stuff like that. And like that is
It's
what in the
because
yeah.
I have a lot of like I identify a lot with my American peers, like my friends. It's because you guys inherited a political like language and a political sort of like dynamic that does not feed your needs. it
Yeah.
does not fit it does not fit the way you even communicate.
Yeah.
Um, it's
And
it's a system. It's a system that was set up, a federalist system that was set up to protect property owners.
mm,
And when a system is set up to protect property owners, when you present ideas that go beyond property, that go beyond this understanding of statehood that defends itself and protects itself, and presents ideas that have to do with more communal
mm-hmm,
integration,
mm-hmm,
of course the system is going to rebel
mm-hmm.
against that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right, and I don't think, I mean, we have, in the United States, the demographics are changing,
Right.
so you
Right.
have young people who say this doesn't represent me, and maybe,
Right.
and so,
Right.
but Omar, I do not want to take too much more of your time. We have talked so much. I had more questions for you, but I think we're gonna have to stop right there. But also, that was a really you mentioned to me that you were kind of happy to take it on a whim, and we did. Like, we didn't exactly go in the order that I had planned, but actually it was great, and we talked about so many interesting things. So
Yeah.
so thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much for talking to me, and keep me in the loop for everything that's going on in the
No,
future.
thank you.
All
Thank you
right.
for being so kind with your time. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thanks.